Well, a few days ago, a Dr. Erickson, who runs and owns part of an urgent care clinic up in Kern County, California, just north of us here in Los Angeles, made a lot of a splash by saying that he is laying off nurses and doctors because there are no patients in his hospital. It is empty. They are laying them off for lack of patients. He got a lot of trouble over that. He came up with some statistics. His statistical analysis was argued with, but no one was really arguing with the one fact on the ground that, as he said, I'm not talking about models. I'm talking about what's happening in reality. There is nobody in our hospital. We do not have enough people in the hospital for us to maintain a full staff. We are sending people home. I've heard from personal friends who went in the last couple of weeks with broken ankle or a dislocated shoulder, who said they went to the emergency room in the middle of the pandemic, and there was not only no wait, there was no one there. And these are all anecdotal stories, but I find in the New York Post one that I think carries considerably more weight, because Kern County is obviously not Los Angeles County, and Kern County most certainly is not New York County. But there's an article in the New York Post from a Dr. Daniel G. Murphy, and the headline is, "I've worked the coronavirus frontline, and I say it's time to start opening up." And he goes on to say that he and his staff would have daily meetings and simply watch the mortality grow and grow and grow and be sitting there numb, looking at the number of people who are dying in New York. He's a New York emergency room doctor, but he's saying it's time for us to go back to work because those cases have simply fallen off a cliff. They're simply fallen off a cliff. I'm going to go ahead and do something that I do during the coronavirus, during the Chronosphere Lounge, and just show you just one interesting set of graphs. These are not graphs of COVID-19 infections. These are from a company called Kinsa that makes smart thermometers. All this data is plots of people who have fevers. Fevers can be caused by a number of things, but they are one of the primary symptoms of a severe case of coronavirus. Okay, so take a look at this. We'll start with the chart for the United States. Now, remember, this is not a chart of COVID-19 infections. This is just a chart of body temperatures. And the dotted blue line is the body temperatures, fevers rather, I should say, of where we would expect to see the flu during any given time of the year. That's the baseline for regular flu. The light blue shaded area is the error bars for the flu. And you can see that the United States was heading into the red. Those numbers were departing, going higher than the average for the flu. That means more fevers than you would expect at this time of year. But then you can see right at the end of the red dots where the social distancing kicked in. And after that, it's essentially gone flat. Now, these are 180,000 smart thermometers, but that's a decent sized sample. And they're showing basically zero fevers as an average across the United States. Now, you can tell that this data actually has something to it by looking at two of the other ones. For example, here's Los Angeles. Let's start with LA. LA never really got to the level of a major crisis in terms of numbers. You can see that we were heading north, but we managed to bring that down real fast. But compare that to New York. And you can see that New York was heading for the stratosphere, and that decline is where the social distancing kicked in. But look at the body temperatures now. The orange dot's what's being recorded. Red is abnormally high. The blue dotted line is the number of fevers we would expect to see due to seasonal flu. That's why the line's declining into the summer. And if you extend it off to the right, it would start climbing up again on the other side. Again, these are not COVID-19 infections, but they are body temperature readings over a wide sample. And this is data that's telling us something. So, gentlemen, here's my question and my complaint. I don't have 2020 foresight. I don't know what the future is going to hold. I don't need a conspiracy of evil to explain the actions of President Trump, Dr. Fauci, or anybody else. You can certainly explain what's happened in the last 6 or 7 weeks by assuming that people are doing their very best in a situation where nobody knew what was going on. But if we have, in fact, flattened the curve, and we certainly have seemed to have done that, if we flatten the curve to the degree that it's a crater now, and we're closing hospitals because there are not enough patients, Steve, my main concern here and my main complaint here is twofold. Number one, there's no feedback. A statement saying we're going to close the country or we're going to close the state till May 15th, made on March 15th, is ancient history now.
Yeah.
And the second thing that I think this points out is that since Kern County and New York County are not the same, even though both doctors are saying we're not seeing very many patients here. It's an argument to be made on a much smaller local level, even than the state level. So do you want to take a swing at both of those ideas?
Yeah. Somebody, I think it might have been Dennis Prager, wrote a column last week or earlier this week asking if half the deaths were in Montana, would we close New York City down? And
that was Prager.
No. It was. Okay. Yeah. And of course we wouldn't. The problem is New York City is our financial hub. It's our media hub, and it's one of our political hubs, and it's one of our cultural hubs. And as such, it gets a lot of attention by a lot of people with some very big megaphones. And that's great. I love New York City, but New York City is not Monument, Colorado. My little town is going to be pretty good. You know, one of my concerns, and I think I mentioned this on one of your segments probably about 5 or 6 weeks ago, Bill, was when we were first learning, when we got the first assumptions about the mortality rate of this thing and how it attacked people with pre-existing medical conditions. I said, oh man, when this thing hits the homeless population in San Francisco or Los Angeles, it's going to be a slaughter. Never materialized. And it's not like the homeless population has changed its habits in any major ways, because they haven't. There's just, it didn't materialize. It turns out coronavirus, yes, it's very nasty. Yes, it can kill people. It's killed tens of thousands of people in this country alone, but it's a lot more prevalent and a lot more deadly. We're working now on a new set of assumptions. But let me tell you, some people seem to be data proof.
Yes.
Yesterday on Facebook, I put up one of my silly little shut-in posts that I think I said, when this is all over, I hope we can all agree to retire the phrase abundance of caution from the American vernacular, which I thought was silly and cute. And keep in mind, I said, when this is all over, that we can retire this phrase that I think we're all very sick of. And one of my Facebook friends, somebody I'm not sure I actually know in real life, I have friends with like 3,000 people, I probably know a couple hundred of them, commented that, yes, it's time to reopen things here in Colorado. And somebody else, another one of these friends who isn't actually my friend, but Colorado resident, but from New York, went to school, I believe, at NYU, if I remember her profile correctly, and came to Colorado to elect Democrats and ruin my beautiful state. Said, yeah, please leave all your homes and it'll thin the herd of Trump voters.
Yeah.
I shortened her comment there, but she did use the exact phrase, thin the herd of Trump voters. And there is a huge difference here. Number one, this person is impervious to new data. She's working on the same assumptions that we had back in early or mid-March, and the data just don't support those assumptions anymore. The other is, I don't see a whole lot of people here in flyover country. In fact, I haven't heard anybody here in flyover country say, God, New York City's finally got what's coming to them for electing all those Democrats all those years.
Good for you.
I haven't heard that sentiment expressed once, but this thin the herd of Trump voters notion.
All the time.
All the time. And let me tell you, I would normally not say that I'm a better person than anybody else. I'm a flawed individual, as we all are. Those are some bad people. Those are some bad people saying those things.
Scotty, that's a great segue for what I wanted to ask you. I've been trying during this entire pandemic to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to determine what is real. There's so many conflicting voices, so many different data sets. I've learned how to weigh evidence over the course of my life, and during the course of these Chronosphere Lounge shows, I've been trying to figure out what's real based on data that I find to be credible. And I think Steve's point about people being data proof is really, really interesting. And I think what I'm starting to see, or actually have been seeing for a while now, is that the people who were in favor of shutting down the economy and hurting Donald Trump politically, the people on the left, were screaming about, we've got to watch the science as the numbers were increasing. And sure enough, we did. We listened and we did this social quarantining. We've got to listen to the science. We've got to listen to the science. We've got to listen to the science. Well, the science is now saying that not only is the curve flattened, the curve is cratered. And they are not now listening to the science. Now they're saying, no, we've got to stay locked down. We've got to stay locked down. We've got to stay locked down. And if emergency rooms are so empty, if USNS Comfort was in New York and maybe handled 150 patients during the entire time it was there, that is a sign that the situation did not saturate to the degree that we feared it would. Again, Maybe there's now foul play, and maybe there's malicious intent in the models. Maybe, but you don't need it. I don't think there is. You could just be taking your best guess or of a worst case scenario. But my point is that, as Steve pointed out, that more and more and more data is saying that at the very, very least, we have not saturated the healthcare system in this country, which is the entire purpose of flattening the curve. So why do you think so many people are in such a tremendous rush to say, oh, if you want to go out there and die, then fine, that's good for you. I hope you have a good trip to hell. Why is it that some people are so attracted to the idea that this is a fatal pathogen that must be resisted, and that if we have to stay locked down for 2 years, then that's what we do?
I don't know how to explain that. I mean, if you watch TV, maybe that's the problem. It's that people pay attention to TV. And even if giving, full credit to the news media for doing the best they can to report on this stuff, which I don't think they deserve, but let's just posit that. If you watch 24/7 news channels that have almost nothing but, here's this virus, these are the numbers, the numbers keep going up, here's a graph, here's a map with dots on it, and you're watching this. Now, here's this is a hospital in New York where there's a crowd. Here's somebody who just committed suicide, a doctor in New York, because we don't know why, but it's somehow connected to the COVID-19 pandemic. All of that, it's a diet nonstop of news that is meant to terrify you, and that in fact does terrify people. And so, and even now, I'll say, not all medical professionals are saying, hey, it's time to go back. In fact, there was a story in I believe the Dallas Morning News this morning, saying that despite the fact that Governor Abbott has said that retail stores and restaurants and other operations, churches and the like, are going to start opening up starting on Friday with low capacity crowds, and then ramping it up as results merit that, that there are health professionals who consult with the state government who are not saying that, who are basically saying, I'm not going out there yet. I'm not going to, I'm not ready to take that risk. I'll be, one of the reasons why I'll be glad when this is all over is I think that we suddenly have a million amateur experts. Everybody thinks they know what's causing it. Everybody thinks they know how to stop it. Everybody thinks they know what the trajectory means. Everybody thinks they know when the experts are wrong and when the experts are right. And everybody's got an opinion about this. And I feel like a moron, but I'm just like, you know what? I don't know. I try to be sensible and go, okay, 20 people have died in my county so far. Okay. Most of those people are elderly people with pre-existing conditions. A number of hundreds of people have contracted the virus that we know of. But obviously we don't know anybody. At some point, we're going to go back to work and we're going to be as careful as we can be. But there's a fair chance that me and the target group of geezers will pick up something. But, I work with the public every day, so there's always a good chance that I'll pick up something. We hope that this something doesn't kill me soon, but I'm going to be with Jesus eventually anyway, so why not now? I guess I'm saying all this to say I don't want to be too light about it. On the other hand, I just think that a lot of people have allowed themselves to get sucked into this vortex of negative thoughts and emotions, of nonstop negative news. And we have all given ourselves doctorates in pharmacology and biology and immunology and allergens and all this kind of stuff. We all think we know now. And just let me get to the front of the line to say, I don't know. I'm doing the best I can based on the inconsistent information that I have. And ultimately, when I do go back to work, which looks like it's going to be next week, I'm going to take the best precautions I can and also realize that all of life is a risk. And I don't know. Sometimes I just think we should all lighten up a little bit and have a little more humility about what we think we know.
Yes. I think that the reason there are now 100 million amateur epidemiologists is because the American people have understood that at no point during this process have we ever gotten realistic, unfiltered information that was presented in perspective. That's why everybody's an amateur now, because everybody is aware of the fact that we have not been given anything like the a reasonable, rational explanation of what's going on. This could have been done in a way, and I'll just give you one example. You could have done a graph of a bar graph of the number of people who are dying of COVID-19. If you put that next to a graph of the number of people who have died since the beginning of January of the flu, and also next to the people who've died since the beginning of January of heart disease and obesity and diabetes and so on, an honest report would say, yes, this red bar of COVID-19 is new. These are so-called additional deaths. Again, if we were doing this the right way, we would only measure COVID-19 deaths as people who died of COVID-19, not died with COVID-19, not tested positive for COVID-19 as they had a heart attack. But there are any number of ways where we could have done this much better in terms of the media. But what becomes more and more clear to me now is that if we have been so effective in this, I don't know whether we overestimated this disease or not. That's not something I'm qualified to speak about. But I do think I am qualified to say that if there are reports of emergency rooms across the country being empty, then we have done a great job, number one. And number two, we have done more than a great job. We have overreacted. And we need to start letting people back out there, and we need to let people go back into the world. I hope you're sitting down, progressives. I hope, because no one's going to come to a shock to you. Not going to come a shock to conservatives, but to the vast number of progressives who watch the show on a daily basis. We need to let people go back out there so that they can become infected. And the people who are going to be sick are going to go to hospitals, and we will have the capacity to deal with them. No one is saying, and no one has ever said, they may have had different motives, but what were we told from day one, from the beginning of the pandemic? What was the mantra? Flatten the curve. What does that mean? Well, here's a bar that represents our ability to deal with critically ill people. If we don't do anything, if we do no social distancing, the number of cases are going to go crazy. We're going to have a relatively short pandemic, but it's going to be very severe. And once the medical system is flooded, not only do the following COVID-19 people not get treatment, but people who had heart attacks, people who've been in car accidents, they don't get treatment either. The entire purpose of flattening the curve was to keep the number of infections below the ability of our healthcare system to manage. And if we are laying off doctors in Kern County, and if doctors in the Bronx or in Brooklyn are saying, yes, it was horrible, but it's not horrible now, that's data. And to say that a proclamation that was made in early March is going to have to exist and continue is the problem. And now we're down to the brass tacks here. Now we're down to the brass tacks. Because the only reason I can think of that a politician doesn't say, hey, we originally said we'd have to be closed to May 15th or June 15th or whatever, but we're looking at how things are. We're looking at our emergency room capacity. We think we can open up sooner. The only reason that's not happening is because if we were to admit that the fact that there are empty emergency rooms all throughout the country now, that's an admission that we were spectacularly successful in dealing with this pandemic. It's nothing but good news. It's nothing but good news. We could look at it and say we were successful beyond our wildest dreams. So now let's go back to work. But the political climate in this country has made it impossible for the press to report the single salient fact about this. And that is that this pandemic did not overwhelm our healthcare system, that the pandemic did not result in doctors saying, you're going to have to go home and die now because we don't have enough beds for everybody, that all of these things didn't happen. They didn't happen for any number of reasons, but they didn't happen. And that's good news. And good news about this cannot be reported. Do you know why good news about this can't be reported? I do. I know that a party and a media that have been complicit in trying to find collusion with Russia, trying to find any number of reasons to bring this president down, found this pandemic and bet the farm on it. And they're not willing to let it go yet. That's what I'm quite sure is the case. And so people continue to be out of work, but reporters aren't out of work. And billionaires who tell us that we need to stay home until June or 2021, they're not having a hard time with it. Ultimately, this comes down to to class, really, and the wealthy elite who are able to ride out this kind of thing. And I'm sure many of them believe that going back to work early threatens their lives. Well, other people who don't have those kind of resources, lives are threatened right now. They need their jobs back. And what we're going to find is there will be more infections as we release these social restrictions. And we know that in advance. That's what is going to have to happen. That's why the curve is elongated and flattened. The final thing I'll say about this is simply this. Given how invested the media is in proving that this is a world-ending phenomenon that requires us to remain in our houses until at least after the November election, what I find interesting is not what I'm seeing, but what I'm not seeing. And you're not seeing it either. A report on this doctor in Kern County criticizing him for making this statement was issued by the Public Health Service of Kern County. And during the course of that report, the news, local news, included shots of people in full biological containment suits and wearing the face mask, and they got the entire suits on. And I happened to notice as one of these people turned towards the camera that they're all Chinese. And I realized this footage is coming from Wuhan in January. I noticed that when they did a story on overcrowding in New York hospitals at the beginning of this pandemic, that the footage they used was footage from Italian hospitals where patients were in the hallway and the floors were covered with people who were coughing and for whom there was no care. And so what I haven't seen over the last 6 weeks is I have not seen endless amounts of videos of Americans overwhelming the hospital system, coughing out in the hallways. I haven't seen gurneys lined up in the halls. I haven't seen lines of ambulances like I saw in Moscow, where it's apparently 9 hours to get you into a hospital. Oh. I haven't seen any of that. And if you don't think that they would show it if it existed, you're out of your mind. The fact that you don't see the system collapsing is evidence that the system isn't collapsing, because if there was any video evidence of it, we would never, ever hear the end of it. So it makes me wonder why it is that this press is not willing to say, congratulations, America. We've made enormous sacrifices. And while it has been incredibly painful for all of us, we have saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans. And we think that those lives are worth it. And we don't have a national health system that says, yeah, you're too old, go and die. Congratulations. Amazing job. Let's let people back to work slowly now. Let's ease these things off slowly, and more infections will happen, but we'll keep them underneath the ability of the healthcare system. And it's the biggest win of the century. Why don't we start talking about that? Well, because if it's the biggest win of the century, then there's no need to completely overturn the political order of the United States come November, is there? There's no reason to push a guy who doesn't know what year it is as a guy who could have better dealt with a pandemic if it turns out that the pandemic was dealt with pretty well in the first place by a president who was willing to not only take unpopular steps early, but also had the genius to understand that New York is not Kern County, and therefore let this idea of federalism take hold. You're governor of this state. You do what you think is appropriate for your low density state. You're the governor of New York. You do what you think is appropriate there. Every day that goes by, the fig leaf that we need to stay in because of the current medical situation, not the medical situation of a month ago, the current medical situation warrants it, is a day when people are not looking at data. And the only explanation for that is either a tremendous amount of anxiety and cowardice, and or a media that is, and a political class that's determined that to admit that we dealt with this well is to lose the opportunity of this crisis in the first place. And I find that reprehensible beyond words, really. That's costing people's jobs and their lives. Anyway, that's this edition of Right Angle, made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com. If you value hearing contrary opinions, we'd love to have you be a member. These shows cost money to produce, and small numbers of people produce shows so that large numbers of people can watch them. So if you want to be one of those folks, we'd love to have you. I'm Bill Whittle for Steve Green and Scott Ott. We'll see you next week on Right Angle.